Thank you, Doug. He gave half of my talk for me, so you can leave now. In 1995, when I first started working with water, I could not convince people there was a water problem. Today, with our extreme weather events and rampant flooding, severe droughts, and massive fish die-offs, we all know too well that we have serious problems with water. Clearly, we need to find new ways of fueling, feeding, entertaining, and sheltering our species. We need to continue developing new technologies, fixing leaky pipes, and reducing consumption. But there's something more fundamental and at least equally urgent that has to happen. We need to mainstream a different understanding of what being human can mean and our relationship to the larger context of life. Despite any illusions we might have about ourselves, we're not very rational creatures. Recent neuroscience tells us how much happens at the physical level and at the emotional level that actually drives consciousness. So if we're going to make any serious changes in our thinking and our behavior, we have to reach down to the levels of our body, our hearts, and our dreams. So this led me to develop what I call biosculptures. These are living sculptures that, as Doug mentioned, filter and clean polluted water, and they integrate that with the aesthetic and metaphoric capacities of sculpture. They work like wetlands, where the plants and the microbes that live in the roots of the plants take the toxins and pollutants in the water and they turn it into food for their own metabolism. So in healthy natural systems, there's no such thing as waste. These large hands, called the gift of water, are part of a wetland outside of Dresden, Germany. These hands are overgrown with plants. They're immersed in water, they hold water, and as you can see, they breathe water. What's remarkable about this wetland is it provides the filtration for this amazing swimming complex, as I said, outside of Dresden, that's used by 1,500 people a day. It's entirely filtered by the wetland, by the plants. No chemicals or chlorine at all. Now, as with all biosculptures, the main agent here is the microbes. And we each have a very intimate relationship. In fact, we all share something about our intimacy. Our most intimate relationship is with bacteria. In our bodies, 90% of our cells and at least 90% of our DNA is actually bacterial. Only 10% is human. So each of us, even in addition, has our own mix of bacteria, our own bacterial signature. We can't survive without them, so it makes me wonder why we call ourselves I rather than we. When I was making this piece, these hands, the gift of water, I injured my own hand and it got infected thanks to some other bacteria. And I couldn't use my hand for a week. It started me thinking about how we imagine our bodies and what the ecological implications of this might be. And also wondering why for years I had been making these big sculptures that were parts of the body, big tongues, 6-foot-tall tongues, feet, and now hands, that were insistently whole as sculpture, but also equally insistently parts of our body, so wholes that were parts. I'll come back to that in a little while. These hands are part of a project in Cincinnati, Ohio, called Laughing Brook. Here, over 100 biosculptures collect stormwater in an underground cistern and treat that water, filter it, before it can go into the nearby, very endangered urban river, the Mill Creek. Now, what's the big deal about stormwater? When stormwater runs across the surfaces, the hard surfaces of our city, it picks up a cocktail of pollutants, things like oils and gas, chemicals of various sorts, heavy metals from brake linings, salts, fecal matter, and more. And it takes that as it travels over these hard surfaces and over in heavy storms overwhelms our drainage systems and goes right into the nearest waterway, polluting that as well. So it's very important to slow it down, treat it if we can, and so it won't cause flooding. So here, the hands turn and abstract, and by the time they've gotten to the river, they've turned into 6 species of fish that would actually be there if the river were healthy. So there's a kind of reverse evolution going on here, and I hope it provokes questions about what might our relationship, our connections to other species be. To affect people at the deep levels necessary, I think it's best to have people actively involved in the projects, not just seeing them as an audience, but really as actively involved as possible. So here I'm in Salo, Finland, a couple hours west of Helsinki, working with high school students and other local volunteers to build these 3 floating islands called the Magic of Water. These islands exist in what used to be a municipal sewage treatment lagoon. But when it was decommissioned for this, as part of the sewage treatment process, so many birds started migrating through here and nesting here that it became an official EU conservation site. And there was one problem. The birds, the baby birds and the eggs were getting eaten by small mammals. And then I wondered, what about that water quality? It used to be a sewage treatment lagoon. So I did some research, and the water needed help too, and so did the sediment. So I proposed these 3 floating islands that provide nesting sites for the birds and plants to clean the water. Here it is during the first year of growth, and after 3 years, they're starting to look natural, and you can see who feels extremely at home here. The baby birds, as you can see here, are thriving, I'm really happy to say. We're getting new species, which you can see in the lower right corner, and the water quality is dramatically improving. There's also a misting sculpture, which is partly just because it's beautiful, and I want to make things that are beautiful, but also, now that they're starting to look natural, to remind people that these are actually human-made, and humans can do good things for other species. This project is at the Roosevelt Community Center in San Jose, California, a much drier climate. In fact, it's dry 9 months a year there, but during those other 3 months, when it rains hard and heavy. And again, that stormwater overwhelms the drainage systems and carries pollutants, in this case, into the nearby Coyote Creek. On 2 sides of the building, I built these installations that collect stormwater from the roof and filter it before it can go back into the system and go to the river. This is the Coyote Creek filter on one side of the building, and what you see on the left is the glass filter where you can actually look through it. It's a rock filtration system, and see the filtration system happening as the water trickles through it. The pattern that goes across the 2 elements here is the map of the Coyote Creek watershed. And here it is illuminated at night, so it really features these patterns. They're called dendritic patterns, comes from the word branch, so they're branching patterns. And I wondered, do these feel at all familiar to you? You might want to look down at your arm or the back of your hand, or perhaps the veins of your heart. We have these same branching patterns throughout our arterial system. This is the drawings of our neurons in our brain, the same branching patterns. And the magnificent bronchial tree of our lungs reflects so beautifully the structure of the trees that give us the oxygen that those lungs need to breathe. It's amazing. Without them, again, we can't survive. And the smallest leaf can do something that we can't do. It can take sunlight and turn it into food. We can't do that. So if we depend upon the trees and the plants for the food we eat and the oxygen we breathe, I ask you, where exactly do we begin and end, and where the trees begin and end if we can't survive without them? We see these same kind of branching patterns in the fetus. These are our kidneys developing. In fact, our whole bodies are really like trees. We call our torso our trunk, and our arms and legs our limbs. And our nervous system, the currents of our nervous systems echo the amazing structure of our great river deltas. On the other side of the building is the thumbprint filter, which is based on my thumbprint, and these 2 tall chutes take the water from the scupper that comes from the roof and drop it down onto this spiral patterned sculpture. And the spiral not only is about my thumbprint, but it also recalls the spiral vortex of water, which is water's signature, and heralds water as the source of all life. We see this vortex in our DNA and in our inner ear and our auditory nerve, and at larger scales where water and air mix in the atmosphere here in a hurricane. Even the minerals of our bone take this spiral twist that shows their formation in the fluids of our body. Branching patterns and spiral forms reveal water's hidden presence in our body, and like family crests, remind us of our lineage and kinship. Now, while it sounds very poetic to speak about ourselves as members of the water family, here in North Dakota, you know that's not the whole story about water. It's not always so romantic. There is the reality of the Red River, and water is very powerful, and it floods. It goes where it wants, when it wants, with little regard for human settlement. Here in Fargo, to deal with this, the city over the last several decades has built these stormwater basins that will hold stormwater temporarily and until it can safely be released to the river without causing flooding. This is the 18-acre stormwater basin at Rabanus Park that Doug mentioned earlier. This was after a 20-minute rainfall that dropped 2 inches of rain last summer. That's a lot of water. So these things are really necessary. But most of the time it doesn't look like this. It looks like this large dry basin. I was invited to think about what these could do or be besides wait for stormwater. And I wondered if they could be places that could enhance people's lives and be a unique feature for Fargo. I thought maybe we could have a marvelous commons where people of all ages could come, gather together to relax, enjoy themselves, explore, refresh themselves, a place full of nature where we could connect with others and celebrate Fargo's rich natural history and cultural diversity right here in the city. This was the beginning of the Fargo Project. But what should it look like? What should it be? I thought, rather than the usual top-down, behind-the-scenes design approach, let's ask the real experts, the people who are going to use this site, and not just to have them tell us what they want it to be, but to have a real continuous role throughout the whole life of the project, meaning help create it, help design it, help build it, use it, and help take care of it over the long term. So a true commons. And in the process of this, to experience the amazing creative agency that happens when people of different ages and backgrounds and experiences come together to create ideas and new solutions and actually bring them to life. It's an amazing process. I have the great privilege to work with Nicole Crutchfield, who's with us today, who's a landscape architect and city planner with the city of Fargo. Truly, without Nicole's dedication and thoughtful guidance, this project wouldn't be happening. And we're also working with a wonderful team of local artists, including Dwight Mickelson, Loretta Cantieri, Chelsea Dahlstrom, Michael Strand, and Al Ness. And with our partners, the River Keepers and the Plains Art Museum, and many, many other organizations throughout Fargo. The city was lucky enough to get a very generous grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, a matching grant, to help us do this pilot project at Rabanus Park. That's why I was showing you that particular stormwater basin. So we knew that we needed to speak to people in very intimate ways in small groups and as individuals. So we realized we had to invent a process, and that process was going to be as important as the actual outcome. So for months, we've been going into schools, into churches, having events at the park, speaking with people of many, many different backgrounds, going to residences and businesses in the neighborhood around the park. And we also wanted to learn from the long experience that Native Americans have had in this region. So we invited ecologist and ethnobotanist Linda Different-Cloud to visit the site and give a lecture to help us understand where ecological values and Native American values intersect and how that can be part of the project. We started by asking people how they wanted this space to feel, or this place to feel, and we got some amazing responses. Here are just a few. It should be peaceful and relaxing, a place that makes you want to sing, that's accessible and welcoming to everyone, and that buffers your soul from the wind. It's Fargo. Something that makes you want to stop and pull over, that really catches your eye, and comfortable and beautiful, and a place where your faith and your thoughts can come together. Something quite surprising. a space you can wander through but can't see the whole way ahead, and a place of renewal where you can build friendships and where imaginations can flow, something beyond words. So we then had our design workshop in the spring, and we started in the park to kind of inaugurate it as a place of celebration and festivals, because that's going to be a lot of what happens there. It's what people have said they want. So we started with Native American drumming and dancing and refreshments, and then we went into the library, and over 90 people got together that day, people of all ages and backgrounds, to work, as you can see here, with these wonderful kind of sandboxes in the shape of the basin that one of the artists made. And you could change the topography. We had all kinds of props, and you could invent your own. So whatever you wanted to see here, you got to work on, and people got to collaborate in teams. And everybody had a fantastic time, as you can see. And more important, or as important, we got some fantastic ideas. Even the bus drivers, these two gentlemen on the right who were shuttling people back and forth, they said, we're part of the community, we can join in. And they gave us some really new ideas, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So at this point, we've developed this schematic design with the features that we can do at Urbanus Park, and we've also got so many ideas, for the future projects, because this is a pilot project. So some of these are, we're going to have, people want walking trails through native prairie, so we're going to have, it's large enough to really get a real prairie feel out there. And also meandering streams through wet prairie meadows, an overlook and natural playgrounds for kids with logs and rocks from the river, areas to picnic and relax. People said Fargo is color depleted. We need color in Fargo, so lots of flowers for birds and butterflies and for us, and trees that can provide shelter and shelter from the wind and shade, and also, of course, be beautiful, and then in the winter help shape the snow as the wind blows the snow over the trees. And then gathering areas for celebrations, an earthen amphitheater, a place to have a community garden, a farmer's market, and it's got to be great in the winter too, because we know, again, it's Fargo here, right? So we're well on our way from this to this. And I'm very pleased to say we're going to actually be breaking ground with our beginning projects, hopefully before winter comes, so in the next month or so. So stay tuned. Now, it's clear the Fargo Project has to do with water and community, but what's it got to do with the being of human? And what's the being of human anyway? The being of human is about the verbing of our existence. When we say human being, that's a noun. And as such, it implies an individual identity, which is very much in keeping with the way we think of ourselves in this culture as separate individuals. And the boundary of our skin seems to support this. If we're all 70% water and it's not leaking out or spilling out, we hope, most of the time, how does that stay in there? So when I ask people this, I usually hear some kind of variation of, well, we're like balloons filled with water. Or as one friend of mine says, we're skin bags. But actually, we're really open systems. We have to take in food and water and air and let out our waste all the time. So this idea that we're separate from what's around us, that the inside is separate from the outside or the outside from the inside, is really a fiction. The inner world and the outer world are one continuous world. And the being of human is about acknowledging this continuity and our inseparability from our habitat that supports our lives. Plants can help us here. These are the stomata on the bottoms of leaves seen through a very high-powered microscope. And they open and close all the time to take in gases and water and to let them out. Now, let's just do a quick experiment here. I'd like to do it for 20 minutes, but we don't, that's a whole nother talk. So imagine instead of this kind of continuous envelope, this balloon filled with water, that each of the pores on our skin was like these stomata, and constantly opening and closing in continuous exchange and relationship with everything around us. And water can teach us something too. Water is always changing its shape. It adapts its shape to whatever contains it. And it changes from liquid to solid to gas, really different. So perhaps water's multiple and fluid identity can help us open to the uncertainty and paradox of our own identities. That while we experience ourselves as individual wholes, we are really dependent parts of a magnificent interdependent universe. And the verbing of our existence, what I said the being of human is about the verbing of our existence, this is about really experiencing ourselves as part of this larger ongoing process. Now, this is not new knowledge, but we need to relearn it and bring it into our contemporary context, this ancient, ancient wisdom. I can think of no task more urgent for our survival as a species, because everything we do, any technology we come up with, is based on this foundation of who we think we are. As the FBI knows so well, our fingerprints reveal our true identity. The rivers engrave our palms. The galaxies, our fingertips. Thank you.